Welcome to another Kundalini conversation. My guests today are from the Kundalini Collective. We have Alan and Samir.
Hi.
Welcome, guys. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Hi. Thanks for having us.
Oh, you're so welcome. I'm really excited for our conversation. So, for those who aren't familiar with the Kundalini Collective, um, you're an online organization, also has in-person meetings with the intention to support those going through Kundalini awakening. And so on your channel, you've got some podcasts with some pretty well-known figures in the Kundalini support space. I saw you had an interview with Craig Holiday, with Mukti, who of course is Adyashanti's wife. As well, you've got a community online where people can go to seek out support in the midst of their Kundalini process. Now, Alan, Samir, together, they've got years and years of experience with Kundalini that we're going to get into today. Alan had, you might call a spiritual emergency or a crisis, which we'll get into. Samir's journey took him around the world. It seems he was led intuitively by the Kundalini itself. So we're going to dive into these interesting journeys. We'll get Alan, Samir to share some of the challenges you faced, the solutions you found. And of course, we'll dive into more about what the Kundalini Collective initiative is all about, how people can connect with you and contribute and benefit from what you've got going on. So why don't we start today with you sharing a little bit of an overview of the Kundalini Collective, how it began, what's going on there, where it's going. Alan, Samir, whoever would like to, share about the Kundalini Collective, please feel free.
I can start with some history, and maybe Smith could then fill in the details. I guess the history was back in 2016 when I had my Kundalini awakening. I was desperately looking for support. I had a vague idea what was happening to me, but there was no support. And then there's a guy in London who supposedly supported people through Kundalini awakening. And I suggested to him that he'd start a peer support group, which he did in 2017, which is where myself and Samir met. And there were a few sessions, but they weren't particularly consistent. And myself and Samir had conversations, and we thought maybe we could do something better basically. We also, both of us independently, had connection with Bonnie Greenwell, doing her. I did a couple of her courses, which online courses, which were very good. And we mentioned to Bonnie that we were wanting to start this. So the idea, this is before COVID, the idea was really very, very sort of small scale to meet people face to face, just to meet others who are going through the Kundalini process. The idea would be an informal support group. Bonnie sent contact details, obviously with people's permission, to Samir. And then in 2018, we had our first face-to-face meet-up in London. Samir, well, there's 4 or 5 of us, I can't remember now, something like that. Very much, we had a number of face-to-face meetups, which are great. Each time it's fantastic meeting other people going through the process. And then COVID happened and the meetups went online. And then it's really, I think, so much of the credit, to be honest, is with Samir. I've been, seeing myself more in a supportive sense in a way, because some of the most significant developments we've had have been through Samir. And so we were, the people coming to the face-to-face meetups and the Zoom, we were communicating by email. But Samir had the idea of developing a website which could be sort of a center, a sort of a crux for community. And maybe I should then pass over to Samir. But one other thing to say is that we will both very much believed in the power of peer support, that we can learn off and support each other. But over to Samir.
Yeah. Hi, Brent, and thanks for having us. I think Alan's story is correct, and I guess the thing that I would say is that I had an awakening in 2006, and for 11 years, my Kundalini steered me well away from any people with Kundalini. I might have read about them, and I may have read some forums, but something in me just said, just go through this on your own. Then around 2017, that's when, as Alan said, we met because someone had advertised on a group, Kundalini London Meetup. And I thought, okay, now I feel ready to meet some people. And it just felt like when I met with Alan, I felt we connected, and just something sparked at that moment. And it felt like we should, having a physical meetup, there is a sense of a greater kind of awareness of something happening in a group setting with people who have Kundalini together. And so, many forums online are quite American orientated, but I live in London, Alan's in Oxford, and we wanted to meet people in the UK. We didn't even know whether there were that many people. And because I was in contact with Bonnie Greenwell by then, I asked her, the late Bonnie Greenwell, and she sent me, she thought it was a great idea, and she sent me the details after asking permission of people who lived in the UK and Ireland. And we started a physical meetup, and as Alan said, there were 4 people at the first meetup, and it was great. It was interesting, and it was weird because we had a pizza in a pizza place in London. It's not like we, in the meetup that I met Alan, the guy hosting it, would have meditations and other things. It just didn't feel right. When we had a pizza, we talked, and it was like a normal meeting amongst people who have a similar interest. And what became obvious was the normality of Kundalini amongst people we just meet. They come from all walks of life, all classes, all social settings. And there's something that joins us together, which is this kind of awareness of something else in our lives that's guiding us, a guiding force. But other than that, we're just normal people living normal lives. And in 2020, during COVID, I just felt that it wasn't sustainable to do this with an email group. And I had the time, and I never made a website in my life. I just, again, it's, I feel guided all the time. I just felt guided to make a website, and it kind of worked. It's working. One of the ethos, as Alan says, is both Alan and myself have and we're not fans of hierarchies. That's historically I never have been, but I think my Kundalini awakening process made me understand that hierarchical structures don't make any sense, not anymore. And the whole point of the Kundalini Collective is it's a collective, and Alan brings a more political sense. I mean, we're both political in different ways, but Alan has a kind of background in this, just how to work with groups and how to give ownership and agency to people within a group, how to not create structures of hierarchy. And it might be a bit more difficult for people because we don't, nobody is a guru, but everyone is a guide to each other, whether you're new or whether you're old in the process. And I think we kind of believe in the wisdom of crowds. So when we have a meeting, we let everyone speak and everyone has a chance to say something, but also everyone can give advice to everyone else. We just try to guide that structure. And it seems to work. Other people have different structures, and what we try and do is we just try and allow people to be themselves. And I think one of the best things about having this online and offline meetup, we meet in Hyde Park in London once every couple of months, and there's a feeling of there are normal people going through a normal process with normal lives, and the idea of the spiritual becomes more grounded when we meet, and it gives credence to the idea that something real is happening. Because obviously if you're going through this alone, you can read about it and you can feel something's going on, but because no one around you validates your experience, it can create a kind of cognitive dissonance. Whereas when you meet people who are going through it and they're normal and they're all saying the same thing, you begin to realize, okay, well, this is real. And we're not living in a psychosis. Now, that's obvious, but it begins to eliminate the idea that there's, that this is not right. No, there's something real is happening. And so, so 3 years after the website, last year, I think we began podcasts. And the other thing I'd say about running, the history of, the history of the community, there's something about a collective as opposed to an individual, and a collective awakening. And so when you feel into the energy of a collective, and I use the word feel into literally, as in I can feel into the energy, there's something bigger happening. I don't know exactly what's going on, but it feels like there is a collective awakening happening. And we're not the only group. I want to give a shout out to When Lightning Strikes, who are friends of ours, have their own group going on, Gordon and Kate. And there are probably other groups that happen that we don't know about, but these are all part of a collective awakening. Social structures that are being created naturally, but also probably in the bigger sense, serendipitously, because something bigger is happening, and it allows people to share wisdom and knowledge of their own individual journey, but within a group setting, and that knowledge is shared. But people don't create hierarchical structures, and so nobody's above someone else, and so you own your energy when you speak or when you share. You're not projecting it. We try to avoid projection of energy to somebody else to elevate them. So I think that's probably, I don't know, Alan, if there's anything else you want to share about. It sounds quite boring, doesn't it?
Not at all.
I think just the other thing to add, it's just really just adding to what Samira is saying there. Yeah, we definitely don't want any projections going on, and also, when you start a project, there's one or two people need to take initiative and get it going and set parameters. We have a code of conduct, which I think is really important, which is that we're all offering our views. None of us have a monopoly of any kind of reality, or we offer our views and what helps us personally. But the other thing to say is that we've done it a way to, and this is happening more and more now, to open it up so that there are, I think, 8 of us now who meet every other month and sort of plan what we're doing, and different people are taking on different roles. So with the Zoom meetings, which are now monthly, someone else actually organises those, not us. There's a group of 5 or 6 of us who take it in turns to do the facilitation. So it's not just about Samira and myself, and one day perhaps we'll go on to something else or whatever. But the idea would be that the collective itself is running itself. So it's not about us. It's really about the collective, and it's about connecting people together. I think that's the essence of it.
Yes, a self-sustaining structure or system. I think that's what we want to create. I can't see us running it forever. I don't think I'd want to, nor does Alan. But it feels like something to create and let it begin to sustain itself and then move on.
Yeah, just one thing to add from my heart chakra. I think this is the case in the face-to-face meetups, but also on the Zoom. Now I think there's a lot of just connection and love between people. It sounds a bit hippy-dippy, but there is, and that just feels such a powerful positive. That natural warmth. Just recently, well, actually, it was back in April. Actually, we had a face-to-face meetup in London, and I think there were 10 people there. Most of those people hadn't met each other before, because we're very open. We encourage new members. We encourage new members' involvement. And there was just this immediate communication between people, and immediately people were having conversations, really quite profound, open conversations, which felt really, really very special. So it's been very enjoyable being involved in this as well. That's the other thing I like to say. It's been fun as well.
Great, incredible. Yeah, many themes have come up so far in your overview of the history and the intention behind the Kundalini Collective. The timelines seem to line up very similarly to me as well. I began doing this work just before COVID, and I had a small meditation group at my friend's yoga studio. COVID happened and it all went online. And I was able to connect with so many more people around the world. And I think we share a very similar, if not the same, ethos I like to say I'm not the final word on this. This is why I have people like yourselves on to talk and to share from your experience and wisdom. And maybe we have different experiences, different ideas, different perspectives, and that's okay. I don't think anybody really knows everything about this process, but we all have a piece for each other in some way. And it seems that's the same sort of thing unfolding with what you've got going on with the Kundalini Collective. I especially like on your code of conduct in your meetings, you invite people to recognize that there are no absolutes. And I think you even give an example and you say, you know, if you want to share something, try and say, hey, in my opinion, or in my experience, or I believe, as opposed to coming across as, you know, like you have the answers. Because that, I think we're moving very quickly beyond that sort of paradigm, where we're recognizing that we can come together in the ways that you've described and benefit from one another and not have a sort of hierarchy. And I mean, you mentioned when lightning strikes, I see the same timeline with their organization as well, and the same ethos as well. So it seems that something is orchestrating, you know, these little pockets developing around the world. Do you think that there's like a higher intelligence guiding us all in a synergistic way?
I mean, I would try and answer that. Obviously, it's a subjective opinion. I think that I think there's a collective consciousness. I think you know, go back to Jung and his idea of a collective. I think, you know, in my Kundalini experience, I've had moments of connection with that collective, and there's a sense of a oneness and a sense of a non-dual space, and in that space there's a new structure, and I think that structure is being brought down to people. So people have a moment of epiphany with that space, and then they come back and they bring something of that structure back with them, and that new structure is no longer hierarchical. It's not a pyramid. It's not a tetrahedron. It's a new shape being formed, and in that shape, people are allowed to create a position. They're allowed to create. Allowed to act a position, let's say, take on a persona, and they can move and they can take on another persona. So, and people move fluidically with each other. So there's a new structure being created. We're allowed to be who we want to be, and then we can change to be someone else. And I think that requires a new language, a new way of approaching each other, a new way of communicating with each other, a new relationship, where we're no longer tied to one way of being. So in terms of your answer, this higher consciousness, well, I would say yes, in the sense that the earth is a consciousness, or the universe is a consciousness, and it's continually changing and shifting, and we have aspects of ourselves connected with that. And when we have that kind of non-dual awareness or experience of oneness, we're connecting with it, and we may just experience bliss, but we're not actually just experiencing bliss. We're probably getting some kind of sense of a new system, and we come down back to earth, literally, and then we have to kind of live. We start realizing we're slightly different, and we work in a different way because we brought something back. And I think so. It sounds like you did this, and Kate and Gordon have done it, and many others, and they're working in different places. We don't know who they are, but they might be working in aerospace or in governments or in medicine, and they're probably bringing something back. So something's going on, and I guess people like us are creating the connections between different people, which will grow and grow and grow over the next few years.
Yeah, and I mean, just to add to that, I mean, I believe that we are all part of the one consciousness, and I think what's been happening with the Kundalini Collective, and I think probably, you know, the other groups as well, is that in a way, rather than acting out of a sense of ego, so somehow planning ahead, projecting to the future, I think what's been happening is that we've been allowing I don't know, I feel uncomfortable about talking about a higher, but we've been allowing consciousness to come through us, rather than it being ego driven. So it's been totally organic. We haven't really planned anything, to be honest, and I think that because so on that level, feels that other groups are perhaps coming from the same, that coming through, it's coming through us, and we all are, in my mind, we are part of this consciousness. So it's not surprising, as we are part of the one consciousness, that there's a common factor. And yeah, so yeah, that would be my answer to your question.
Yeah, great. I completely agree. We're bringing something forth. I like the way you described Samir in different fields as well. Obviously, it's very apparent, when you're organizing a Kundalini group or peer support group, it's very obvious, but it must be happening in other spheres as well, under different context, different terminology, and so on. Interesting. I think we'll start to see more and more of these groups emerging. So peer support, the support of a community. Samir, I know you mentioned early on in your journey, you felt, to be rather, to yourself, which I think is a valuable time on the path for us all. But eventually you were called out to, start connecting with others. And Alan as well, from what I know of your story, maybe you sought help, or people tried to help and didn't understand what was going on with you. So why don't we explore a little bit about your well, Alan, it looks like you're lagging a little bit. So we'll actually go over to Samir. Samir, why don't you tell us a little bit about your awakening process? In particular, this period where you were felt to kind of, figure it out on your own a little bit. I believe you mentioned, you were traveling the world. Can you talk a little bit about that phase of your life?
Yeah, so my awakening process happened in March 2006. And at the time, there wasn't much on the internet there was stuff on the internet about Kundalini, but the word Kundalini wasn't prevalent. And I wasn't coming from a world where Kundalini was prevalent, although my parents knew what it was, and I'm from a Hindu background. So I was quite shocked because I had a spontaneous movements and spontaneous pranayama, and I wasn't sure what's going on. So do you want me to tell you about the process of what happened, or is there anything particular you want to know about, or just a general?
Well, I think for our audience, can you explain a little bit about what led up to this spontaneous pranayama, what that experience was like for you? Because I feel there's a lot of people having spontaneous experiences and they're just confused. So if you can give them something.
Yeah, well, so I don't think Kundalini happens overnight. I think there's a lifetime process. And when you retrospectively look back, you realize that you've probably been preparing for it for a long time. So there was that moment of awakening. But I think before I get to that, what I would say is that I went, my background is Asian parents in the UK, maybe similar in Canada. You go for, they work hard, send you to good school, send you to good university, want you to work and make money. So I had that background, and I did economics at one university. I worked in the city, and something was definitely making me feel unhappy, and I felt like this doesn't feel right. I had a background. I used to DJ a lot back then, and I used to love music, and I used to love the creative arts, and I felt I was being pushed into a world I didn't like, and I was working in finance, and so there was this time when I was extremely unhappy, and now I recognize it as depression, but I didn't know it, and there was no discussion in my family. Men don't get depressed. Men work, they make money, they don't share their emotions, and if you have a good job, you should just be happy that you have a good job and you're making an income. So I was in this world where I was extremely sad, extremely depressed, but I didn't know I was depressed. I didn't know I was allowed to be depressed. I didn't know I could even talk about it. And so I managed to figure out a way of getting out of that world. And I really thought, okay, I want to work in the music industry. And so my finance background helped me get into the music business world, and then from music business into film finance. And I really did think, oh, this should make me happy. I should be really happy that I'm now working in a world where I'm in the entertainment industry. And actually, I was still extremely unhappy, and something didn't feel right. There was this aching pain in my heart that I was never really connected to. I could feel something heavy there. And so there was this period of time, now you can work it out as 10 years. It's from university to the world of work, and nothing felt right. And I can look back at that 10-year period and call it a long dark night of the soul, which ended in 2006 with the Kundalini awakening. And near the end of that long dark night of the soul, I wasn't listening to my heart or my body. And what happened was I got extremely severe sciatica. So my L5 S1 left side was always aching and always giving me warnings, you should watch out. But the lifestyle I was living, because I wasn't able to connect with my emotions, just stopped me from really acknowledging that not that I wasn't happy, that I was just on the wrong path, that whatever I was being driven by, even though it was now in the entertainment world, I wasn't happy. So the sciatica was so severe, I wasn't able to walk. I actually was laid flat. And I think this is the beginning of something. Your body's telling you something. If your body's telling you to lay flat, it's giving you the opportunity to think. And I turned 30 during that time. And what happened was I was thinking, well, I can't walk, I can't work. I'm a man. Something's not working for me. I'm not happy. I'm sad. And I'm in so much pain. It was so much physical pain. And it suddenly occurred to me, it occurred to me through a series of synchronistic experiences before the Kundalini, about 6 months before, that actually probably what's happening was that that something about my emotion, my sadness, that is tied to my back pain. And I did not know before then that you could store your emotions in your body, and that back pain can be linked to emotions. And when I had that realization and I connected the two, that my emotion and my back pain was probably linked, I suddenly realized, oh my God, there's something going on here. And my back began to slowly get better, enough for me to at least walk. And I thought, I really need to clear space in my life and understand there's something going on. And so a couple of things that I decided to do was, one, study NLP or life coaching, two, and at some point do yoga or meditation. And then life coaching, the NLP part of life coaching was really useful because it helped me ask myself questions without giving me an answer. So the idea is with NLP is that everyone has the answer in them. You just have to write a series of questions. And when you answer the questions, you're actually looking at yourself. And I was doing it to myself. And then I thought, okay, I'll try meditation. And I tried meditation. And that night I went home and I did a meditation at home. And I had this blue light in my forehead, and something happened. And then I began to, over the next few days, start doing spontaneous movements. My hands moving over my chakras, and then slowly my fingers started doing spontaneous mudras, when they still do continuously. My feet were moving in an Indian dance pattern style, which, without any background in this world, the weird thing was I wasn't scared. I actually realized on some level, my heart was telling me, this is what you've been waiting for. It doesn't make any sense and you could be crazy, but actually this is what you've been waiting for. So I went with it. And the first couple of weeks, it worked on my sciatica. So although I was able to walk, I was still in a lot of pain. And it put me through all these postures every night and it was unbelievable for me, because I was watching me push out this pain that was crazy. It was horrible pain. And so I knew something good was happening, because even if nobody around, I didn't tell anyone at the time, but I thought, well, I'm going to go with this because something good is happening. And because I didn't have any kind of friends in the spiritual world, so I didn't have many friends. That my friends were doctors or bankers or working in middle class industry. So what I did was, there's somebody that I knew, I think, who she told me, oh, she was into the spiritual stuff. So she said, go and see this person, and maybe they can help you know what it is, what's going through. And the person I saw didn't mention Kundalini, but said, oh, I've read in a book once about spontaneous movement, and it was a book by a lady called Elizabeth Hike. The book's called Initiation. And I think this is, again, serendipity. I'm glad I went to this book first rather than the book about Kundalini, because it was a German lady who passed away, and in the 1930s she was studying yoga in Germany, and she had memories of a past life in Egypt, and she wrote about these memories of past life in Egypt. The one thing that the Egyptians did, apparently, was they did a form of spontaneous yoga, and their idea, they didn't use the word Kundalini, but they talked about the higher self, and that everyone has a higher self, and the Egyptians were learning how to combine the higher self in themselves in the pyramids, using the, or Alan would like this, using the tomb in the pyramid, it would give them a birth and bring the higher self into them. And it gave me a structure to understand what was going on. So it wasn't Kundalini, it wasn't the Hindu Tantra just then, but it was a structure where I felt, okay, there's a higher self, and the higher self is guiding me. And then after a few months, I came across, again through the internet, the word Kundalini and the idea of spontaneous yoga, spontaneous mudras. And by the way, I wasn't just doing spontaneous yoga, I was doing spontaneous Qigong. And there was a spontaneous Qigong instructor in New Zealand who helped me as well. So there were all these movements happening, and it was helping my back. And because that was the major problem in my life, this really painful back problem, I was really happy. And I also felt that I had some kind of connection with something more, and I was going with it. And I felt this kind of energy. Now I can stop there, or I can carry on. It's up to you.
Well, fascinating story so far. Many interesting lines that you shared there. You know, I think you said it felt right, so I just kept going with it. Intuitively, you knew this is what you've been wanting, even though you didn't know exactly what it was. All clear signs that this is not a process coming to victimize us. It's coming to help us. And deep down, I think we know this.
Yeah.
Part of my intention is to, if I can just take people from feeling like they've been cursed by Kundalini to just getting a little bit of a sense of empowerment, that's my intention. I think your story so far is a great example of how, you know, intuitively you knew this was working out for you. And then, of course, serendipity was bringing you to more information. So why don't you keep going for us?
Yeah. So you know, it's not all great. There is a couple of massive crashes where I regret everything and curse Kundalini for a year or so. But before that happens, I did realize that I realized it was real. I mean, I realized it was real because, in fact, there was a sense that I've been waiting for this my whole life. And the long dark night of the soul, you know, when you're going through it, it wasn't like I was going through it and ignoring it. I was processing something through that 10 years, realizing that I was allowed. I think what I did through that 10-year process before Kundalini was that I wasn't running away from my emotions. I allowed myself to feel pain. So I felt real pain, real depression, real sadness, and I wouldn't run away from it. And I can now look back at that time and realize I was allowing myself to process stuff, although I wasn't in therapy. I was allowing myself to go into quite dark places and not project it out onto people. So there was a sense that I was doing some kind of work on myself. Now, it was inefficient. It wasn't healthy. I think a lot of like many people at the time going clubbing, I was taking MDMA, and there were a lot of come downs, but the come downs would have this profound depressive effect that I wouldn't run away from it. I'd analyze it and go into it, allow myself to feel it. So I do think there was so you know, I'm not advocating taking anything. I'm just saying that allowing myself to feel that I had a massive emotional block, and I spent many years allowing myself to feel the pain. So when I went into the Kundalini, it felt like a graduation from that. It didn't feel like I did feel like I was waiting for something to happen, and I had no idea it would be this. But then there's a big but here. I threw myself into the process, like wholeheartedly. I made it the full part of my life. And in doing so, I think I invited a lot of energy to come in. And I think that made me ungrounded. Because when you combine spontaneous movements in the way that I was doing it, and I suddenly got into crystals, and, you know, I would have made fun of somebody who liked crystals the year before, but suddenly I was buying crystals, and I would hold them in my hand, and I was doing spontaneous movement with the crystals, and I felt I could open layers and layers and layers of my energy, and I was getting this cognitive sense and kinesthetic sense of energy, which I still have. I can feel the energy and work through it, and I could feel it almost open up portals and dimensions around me. And now, you know, obviously no teacher, I didn't know what I was doing. I was throwing myself into it. I went really far, really fast, and I began to have really cosmic experiences, and also experiences which one would say is a bit like madness, but it wasn't madness because it was guiding me. It was like let's say I had voices guiding me to do things, which was very scary, but it was a process. So I think I went too far too fast. Well, or at least I went very quickly, which I would never recommend. And so it opened stuff in me, and I began to have lots of cosmic experiences, lots of intuitions. And some of it was very, very, very scary. Some of it was, and it wasn't, it was such that I wasn't able to speak about it. If I did try to speak about it, my mouth would shut. So it was all in my head. So I'm also saying that it was really difficult. But the process, I began to understand there was a logic to the process. And if I surrendered to it, and surrender is a word I'll come back to again and again, even in the hell that I was in, that it was teaching me something about the way that I related to the world around me. And one of the big things I was telling Alan about this weekend was that I'm not in control. I've never been in control. The most intelligent part of me is my body. And the part that I think that I am, my body is telling me, no, you're not, you're just a speck. And your body is much more powerful than you are. And the spontaneous movement is an example of it, because you're giving over your agency to your body. Your body is working through the part of your system that's blocked, and the part of the system that blocked is who I think I am. So ultimately, I'm eradicating myself. And that's what I realized quite early on, that my body is showing me that very soon I will die. Or I won't die in like a death that people have. I'll die a sense of self over and over and over again. And so there were moments of real sadness and grief that's what I'd given myself over to. And there were moments of profound joy and understanding that actually this is what I've been waiting for my whole life. And it was a very difficult balance to go through. And I was still working in the film industry, and I was producing a film, which didn't get made in the end. But so I had work relationships. I was going through this profound experience, and I had family relationships. And what the process began to do was help me understand how every choice I made, family, business, even choice of film subjects, was related to my karma, the way that I looked at the world, and the suffering that was driving my consciousness. So I wasn't driven by joy or love, but ultimately that my direction up until that point was driven by let's call it pain. That I was, let's say, upset with my father, and so competing with him and making him, trying to be successful, and making him, that was my way of making him proud of me. But that was not being driven by joy, it was being driven by pain. And so I created this world around me that every option that I created was a aspect of my suffering, and that I had to view it from the point of love and the point of suffering, and understand they're both the same, and then go to every single relationship in my life, understand the joy and the pain, and then collapse it into nothing and reset my whole life. And it was extremely difficult. It was really, really, there's this moment of where you realize that when you're not in control, and that you've given yourself over to this force, that actually and you realize there's a ontological shock. You are no longer who you think you are, and the world around you is completely changed. And you could be delusional and psychotic, but it doesn't matter, because you have no control over your body anyway. And so that was the first year. And I had other types of awakening in the year too. So I had an experience in the Sinai Peninsula in Egypt, near opposite, near the Red Sea. Very, very cosmic experience that I was, I feel I was led to. And then I had this download that took me a couple of years to understand, and I felt taken around the world. Went to Brazil, Colombia, Easter Island, Australia, India. I lived in my partner's Egyptian. I lived in Cairo for 6 months, and I felt drawn to all these different places to just ground myself from that first experience. And then having this very kind of cosmic experience in Egypt, where all I felt was that there's a super conscious planet, and that you can merge yourself with it. When you merge yourself with it, you realize the ecosystem, everything is interlinked. There is no inherent self, as the Buddhists will say. So when you come back from that, the challenge is that you have to face real life. I felt that everything that prepared me for the experience in Egypt, so I went through this kind of dissolution myself, connected with a kind of oneness, but then I had to live in real life, and it was a really difficult time, because having to come back from that space and interact with people means that it's difficult to sustain yourself in both perspectives, a kind of non-dual perspective and a perspective of people around you who are not living in that way. And I hadn't done the work on myself. I wasn't, perhaps I had too much cosmic experience to begin with, and I had never done any spiritual work on myself. So I crashed, and I began to have all these intuitions about life, and I was taken around the world, and I think that grounded me. So something said, okay, well, you now have to spend a couple of years living on your own with a notebook in different parts of the world, and you'll be guided to different places, and the energy of that place will just ground you, so you can just come back from that experience. And when I came back, so year 2 and year 3 was traveling around the world, living in different places, just trying to understand what I just experienced in the first couple of years, and trying to live with myself, because it was very difficult to understand who I was, because I kind of lost some of myself. And then I have an amazing partner who's I'm with now, who I was with then, and she really helped. She's not a Kundalini person, but she's the most amazing kind of person who kind of held me in some way, and her energy helped me. And I really believe in that male-female connection, and I think that really helped. And I was able to, over a couple of years and spending some time with her in Egypt, just ground myself from those experiences, so that I was able to interact with England and London again, and my family and other people. And I was getting these downloads to create a set of tarot cards, which I still haven't really worked out what they were for, but it was some kind of expression of my experience, a kind of mandala-like 64 symbols or 128 symbols that I can see around me, and they work symbolically. And that was, I'm still working it out, 16 years later, but it was like I had an experience that I'm still trying to even now understand, but I can understand it in visual ways and in symbolic ways. So it was really, so I'm just talking about the challenge was just trying to ground it, and then come back and live a real life, have a family, work with my family. And then the weird thing is that when I came back to London, and I felt ready to come back to London and face my family, because they're like, what have you been doing for the last couple of years? We thought you were crazy and taking drugs, and Kundalini couldn't happen to you because you're not an ascetic yogi practice, so all these things. And I realized, and the last couple of months before I came back to London, I was being grounded, and then my heart opened up, and it said, you need to be there for your family. Your whole life you've been running away from them. Now you need to be there for them, and you have to work through all of your issues with them so that you can be with them over the next few years. And that's when I started the real work. That's when I started the proper work, working through my shadow. Why do I don't want to be my parents? Why do I not want to be my sisters? Why do I not want to look after them? And the rest of a lot of the next few years was just working through the really grounded part that one should do to begin with, all the work on your shadow and your family members and your friends, and just working out why you pain and why you suffer and why you hurt. So those first 3 years were strangely they're quite cosmic, but they were given to me before I'd done any real work on myself. So even though I had all these experiences, they were pointless because I hadn't done any work on myself first. And the years after that, that's when I did the real hard family shadow real life work. But because I'd been through this Kundalini awakening, I had a sense on how to navigate that process that I wouldn't ever had I not gone through that first 3 years. And even though it was quite difficult, I was facing a dad who said that you're a failure, and a mum that I couldn't quite connect with properly. I realized that I could get through this, and I had love for them, and that I was able to hold space for myself and them, because the awakening process had allowed me to enter into my heart space and find confidence in that space. So that's the first 3 years. A lot more happened after that, but I'll just end there, and I'll just say no. So it was I threw myself into it maybe a bit too hard, and then I suffered and I crashed. And I also, I think I had a bit of an ego, having all of that energy go through me, I felt special. And also the Kundalini, okay, feel special for 5 minutes, and then you'll crash, and then you'll realize that you can't do anything. So all of that was quite healthy in a way. It was a healthy process to really burn my ego and to bring me back to earth. And then the Kundalini guided me to say, well, now do what you do your duty to your family, and enjoy it as well. Don't just do it because you hate, because you feel you have to. Do it because you want to. And that was a really opening thing, and that's probably the best thing that ever happened to me. Sorry, my light's falling. That's probably the best thing about the Kundalini. It brought me my family, and my father passed away a few years ago, but I would never have had a relationship with him had I not had gone through this process, and that's the biggest gift it's ever given me.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for sharing so openly about that. I guess you could say somewhat short segment of your journey, but so many themes came out in those few years that you mentioned. A lot of similarities between our journeys. Like you, I began with looking back what was depression. I didn't know it was depression. Just felt sad. And you said something really, really powerful there, which was that you didn't resist those emotions. You just let them be there. And that was part of your work to process things out by just not necessarily running for them, avoiding them, just letting them be there, leading up to the awakening. I had a similar experience as well, because I think I didn't know that it was depression. There wasn't a label on it. And so therefore there wasn't any invalidation of the depression or invalidation of the experience or resistance. This is what I am. This is how I'm feeling. And so this is how I feel. And I think that was, like you, part of the purging process. A lot of key themes are coming up in your telling about integration. Of course, you had, cosmic experiences, mystical experiences, but you mentioned the word grounding, you mentioned the word integration, merging the higher self with, what we would call maybe the human self. So very key themes of integration there. And I'm just pointing them out because it's just so important. We can have all the mystical experiences in the world, but they don't mean anything if we're not able to, have our feet on the ground. And finally, your theme there about the shadow work, in particular with your relationships. I had a very, very similar phase as well, where I recognized that I will be doing some work, sharing, supporting others going through the process. But I said, how can I do that if in my own house, my things aren't in order, my relationships are a mess, can't connect with people? I've got to address my most immediate circle before, trying to support a more wider community. And that really is where the rubber meets the road in terms of spiritual practice. Very difficult work as well, but like you said, so rewarding. And I appreciate you for highlighting those themes because, on the spiritual path, our family can become like we can start to see that maybe in some respects you might feel that they're in the way, or, I've moved beyond them. I'm awake and they're asleep. I think we're in the family units that we're given for a very good reason. And it's to support us with, processing some of our karma. So thanks so much for sharing that portion of your journey.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll shift gears and explore Alan's journey. So Samir, you mentioned, your family might have thought you were crazy. You mentioned having to ground yourself. You mentioned that you crashed. These are all themes that seem to emerge for many that go through what we'd call a spiritual emergence or a spiritual crisis. And of course, Alan, for you, I know from your story, which is on the Kundalini Collective's YouTube channel, you've got a really well-filmed, well-produced telling of your story out in nature. It's great. I invite everybody to check it out. But Alan, let us know about the period where you felt, or maybe others labeled you as having something wrong with you as you started to go through your process. How did it begin? What kind of difficulty did you face?
By the way, Samir did that film in Hyde Park.
Oh, great!
All Samir's work. That's why it's so good. Okay, well, I think to answer your question, I'm going to have to go back a bit further. And so I'm going back to being a child, and from a very young age, from around 5 years old, I knew there's far more to life than met the eye, and I had experiences. So, for instance, when I was 7, I was sitting around the meal table with my parents, my brothers, and my best friend when I was 7, and it must be like 10 people, whatever, like that. And I had this experience where I got ahead of time. So basically, it lasted for a couple of minutes or so. I knew exactly what my dad was going to say. And then I knew after he'd said something, oh, now my friend Mark will say this, and then Mum will say something. And I just sat there and watched everyone go around the table saying exactly what I knew they were going to say. And it's like I just got ahead of time. And so that was further evidence to me that there's a lot more to life than met the eye. And also, I used to think about what is reality, what's life about a lot. And when I thought really hard, I would get this high-pitched noise in my ears. And then I realized I could think myself to the edge of my words and reality. I could go beyond that. But then I would get very scared and stop. And I would think of something very boring and bring myself down. And then when I was 12, I had the experience of seeing the light. And basically throughout my life, every few years, I've had a premonition or had that kind of experience. But I've had to keep it to myself to start to try to answer your question. I shared it with one of my brothers. We shared a bedroom together. He's 3 years younger than me. When I saw the light, he was there, and I told him the next morning this had happened. And so I did share some of it, but I couldn't share that with my other brothers or my parents or anyone at school. I was aware that of playing a role. At school, I was quite good at football. I could get on with people, but it was actually really just playing a role. This has always been, I think basically, when I look back now, the Kundalini was always bubbling under, basically. But because the way society is, I didn't have any trouble with these experiences, by the way. They were all great, and they all reminded me there was more to life than met the eye, which was really good. So they weren't problematic in any way. But in our society, it's very hard to share those experiences. Then fast forward to the Kundalini awakening. So the question is, how did I relate to the family? So was that, sorry, I've gone off.
No, that's okay. Well, we can touch upon that for sure, but let us know about what we might call the spiritual crisis or the spiritual emergency and the difficulty that arose as you began to experience these sorts of heightened states of consciousness, non-ordinary states, energy, that sort of thing.
Well, what happened I've always had those experiences. It's quite good, quite profound premonitions and so forth. Never a problem. Then in 2015, I was going through this weird state of anxiety. It was I'd been made redundant, which is actually great to begin with, because I walked to Santiago through France. I went away for 2 months and walked to Santiago, the pilgrimage route, which is a brilliant experience. But came back, I couldn't get a job. And then I remember sitting with my daughter at a cinema watching this film, and suddenly I had this wave of anxiety came over me. It was very physical. And this anxiety became so great, I found it very hard to function. Around this time, I always used to do this particular meditation, which is an active meditation. It's a sort of a ritual that's based on Western Hermetic stuff, which is really good. And I did that, mixed it with Reiki, because I was taught up to level 2 Reiki. And then I had this incredibly vivid dream in the night where I was seeing Buddha, and just below Buddha's navel, there's all this energy was building up, and the dream sort of sped up. I was seeing fire in colors and stuff. and I woke up, and this energy was coming up, and I recognized it as being Kundalini, but I thought, oh, I didn't know much about Kundalini. All I knew was enough to be scared, because, oh no, how can I handle this? And it only came up to my stomach as I was able to push it back down again. And then I stopped doing all those meditations. I stopped doing Reiki myself and sort of forgot about it. And actually things settled down for a while. I got some work and whatever. But then ironically, this is the end of 2016, so it's a year later, I got really busy at work, so more than I could actually cope. Really, this was supervising social work students and doing a bit of community work, because community work's my background. And I was getting super anxious again, but I realised that although superficially this anxiety was about work, I realised actually it wasn't really. When I was young, well, all my childhood really, definitely from 7 to 16, my mum was seriously ill. She had very bad postnatal depression, and which became bipolar disorder. So she was mainly, a lot of times she was so depressed she couldn't get out of bed. That's the main manifestation. But a couple of times, she went manic, and she had to be, she's literally carted off in a straitjacket to hospital. Then, but luckily we were relatively well off, so we had people that could look after the children. But anyway, what I realised was, when you're a child, you just cope with these experiences, and actually you push your emotions down. And so it was like, imagine like a well with lots of water in it, but it had been concreted over to keep the water down. And I realised what was happening. The concrete was cracking. And these anxieties were really the anxieties I felt as a child, but I had suppressed. And anyway, this really good friend of mine recommended this acupuncturist who'd helped his partner with anxiety. And so I'm not sure if I'm answering your question. I've just sort of gone off.
No, that's okay. You're giving some context. Keep going.
Yeah. And she put these the needles in me, and it's a massive amount of energy. It's incredible. And I explained my theory about the childhood trauma, and she felt around. She said she felt these knots. Yes, that makes a lot of sense. And then over what she said actually was 2 hours. She put in needles, and then this energy. I forgot all about the Kundalini, and this energy was rising, coming further and further up over time. And I had visions of my childhood and whatever, and then it got up to about here, up to my eyes, and then I could see, basically about that stage, I was in this sort of vision where I could see all these clouds like a William Blake painting, and in the middle of the clouds you could see sort of golden light the other side, and gradually the clouds started to thin in a circular pattern because the golden light was burning the cloud, until suddenly the clouds in the middle are gone, and then the energy just went whoosh right the way through me. And for 24 hours I was sort of in a state of bliss, and I could see everything was connected. I could see colours were incredibly vivid, and I remember ringing up my brother saying, "You must see this acupuncturist," because I know he was having problems with anxiety at the time, and saying, "Well, this is fantastic. Everything's gone." And then, of course, what happened 24 hours later, the energy I felt it switched in my stomach, and suddenly all the anxiety came up, but magnified. And then energy kept coming up, getting stuck in my head. It's like 1,000 watts through a 40-watt light bulb. And I ended up curling up in the living room with all that going on. And I'll make this story shorter because there's other things that happened. But basically I got to the stage, and it's interesting, I think this is a common theme, in the sense I thought I was dying. And I sat on the edge of my bed at home for 2 days, waiting to die. And I wasn't answering the phone or the door, but eventually these friends were knocking on the door, and I did let them in, and I explained to them that I was dying. They also realized something was up, And anyway, mental health services came, and it ended up with me. I thought I should be going to the general hospital, but they drove past the general hospital and took me to a psychiatric hospital. And then I remember going to bed there, and thinking, well, I won't wake up tomorrow, but I did. And then then there was the secondary trauma of being in the clutches of mental health services began. My family, well, actually, was aware of this. Both my parents died quite a long time ago, but my older brother came up to Oxford where I lived and tried to help, and I wasn't easy to handle because I was totally ungrounded, and no, but he did his best, but eventually went back to his home. But I don't know what to say now, but a really good thing, by the way, about safe relations to the family is that my daughter, who was at the time just 16, but her and her mum, myself and her mum we weren't together, but we got on very well. Her mum just had been doing Kundalini yoga, and which is obviously not that related, but they were open to what was happening to me, and that was really helpful. That neither my daughter or her mum stigmatized what was happening to me. They actually had some understanding, but it's very difficult going through the mental health services because mental health approaches in the UK, I'm sure in Canada as well, tend to be, they represent the society in the sense the societal attitudes of being materialistic. So they only see the person as almost like a machine, and the only real tool in their box are drugs. So I was fed so nasty, well, force fed, may I add, nasty sort of anti-psychiatric and antipsychotic drugs, and really pathologized, and I was given a label of psychotic depression, which is ironic because I was never depressed. Funny enough, I was very, very anxious, but I was never depressed, which they never recognized. Even when I was discharged 6 months later, they said that they wouldn't recognize, well, Alan sees himself as having been anxious, but no, he had a serious depression. But the one good thing was that I actually had a really sort of, as it would seem, quite classic heart chakra opening. I was hearing this really fantastic celestial flute music, but at least when they asked me, was I seeing or hearing things, I said no, because I knew that if I had said yes, I'm hearing this fantastic, so they would give me a schizophrenia label if I'd said that. And the lucky thing was that I sort of knew what was happening to me, and so I had that frame of reference. And there will be many people, I think, who would have had a Kundalini, like a difficult initial Kundalini awakening like myself, who would have got those negative labels. And the trouble with those negative labels, if you start to actually internalize them, you can start to be them. But the good thing was that I did have a more positive view of what was happening to me. But it was very difficult. It was really very difficult. And I think that sense of dying is really an ego, a self, your sense of self actually in that moment dying. And in that sense, it's actually really positive. Well, it's really positive. So I feel a bit bad here because I'm painting such a negative picture of the experience. But and I did see it as a curse to begin with. I really did. And in a way that my whole life fell to pieces because I love playing music. I couldn't play music. I love running. I could hardly walk physically. I could hardly walk down the road. It had that, and I love spending time with friends, but I could hardly communicate. So it was very difficult. but it did settle down in three months or so. It started to settle down, and after about 6 months, I was able to function. But going back to the question about the family, apart from my daughter and her mum, my three brothers and their partners saw it all as psychosis, which is obviously what the hospital were telling them. And they did their best to be supportive. And I mean, and since then, I really don't talk about it to my brothers, except for one brother. He's more, he's aware of the Kundalini Collective and so forth, but otherwise it's not something really is mentioned. But I talk about it openly to the daughter and her mum, and her daughter thinks it's great. So my daughter thinks it's great, and so which is great, and so I think I'm stopping. Have I? I haven't really answered your questions.
No, you have. Thank you. Yeah, a lot of interesting themes come up there. Wanting to die, and I guess in hindsight, you see that it's the death of the self, or feeling, not wanting, feeling like you're going to die. Yes. Thanks for correcting me there. Very important distinction there. Thinking that you were going to die, and that's, of course, the feeling of the impending death and rebirth process, right? The death of the psychological self as well. Did you experience something like what we may call no self, that type of thing?
Well, no, I mean, I think in Samir's awakening, correct me if I'm wrong here, Samir, but no, Samir was everything and nothing. I mean, my experience was not at that level as such. So when I could see that everything was one, I was still the observer.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't lose that sense of observing. So I had a real sense of not knowing that I'm not myself, even though, and the interesting thing there for me is I've always had an intellectual understanding that. So always, I did know as a young person, I went to university and I studied sociology, which I loved as a subject. And you get micro-sociology. And in micro-sociology, you look at the construction reality. And so, so you see that the self doesn't inherently, well, this is a Buddhist term, but doesn't inherently exist. In sociological terms, the self is created by the interaction with the world around the self, and then we become the self. So intellectually, for many years, I've known I'm not myself. But what the Kundalini awakening has done, it has shown that experientially rather than intellectually. And there's one particular time, this is actually about a few years ago now, about 3 years ago, where I woke up one morning and actually sat at my computer, sat where I'm sitting now, and I realised I'm definitely not Alan Foulkes. I realised I was just part of the consciousness, and it's almost I could look into the corner of the room and see Alan Foulkes. He was not a bad bloke; he was all right, but I wasn't him. But I could see him, I had some sympathy for him, but I was definitely just really part of the consciousness. So that's as near as I've got to that kind of perception of reality.
Right. I think we all have a different maybe version of it, of those types of experiences, if we do at all. But in the end, like Samir was saying, it comes down to integration and returning back to the world. I think it's interesting that your daughter and her mother both, were aware of Kundalini and didn't stigmatize you. I think that's important to highlight there, because not everybody experiences that type of grace, and they are alone, and some are put through the hospital system, and I like the term that you said there, which was secondary trauma. can you talk a little bit about the environment? What can you say about the environment there and how supportive that could be for a person going through a spiritual awakening?
For a start, I mean, the hospital services in the UK have been starved of finance, especially since 2010. So the state of the ward is really poor. So I was in this room, which actually was like a cell, and I had no cupboard. I had a bed, which is like a really, wasn't a very comfortable bed, but that was it. So I had to put my clothes on the window side, or on the floor. It was a really and then also because I was having so much energy, and also I've always been a runner. I just wanted to run. Now, once I went through a stage where I couldn't move, but once I actually gone through that stage, I just wanted to run. Well, it was a locked ward. There was a small little exercise yard attached to the ward. You were only allowed out there every 4 or 5 hours for half an hour. So what I would do I would go and run round and round and round this yard to try to get, it was horrible. And the staff, when you're in that state, you're very sensitive to people. So there were actually there were two members of staff, one a basic grade untrained nurse, and another who was an occupational therapist. And they were great. They obviously cared. They didn't patronize me, and that was really positive. But there are other staff who are really quite arrogant and quite bullying. And then there were staff who were just there and neutral. But it's a very oppressive environment. I was not allowed a mobile phone. Someone I know who was a social worker, because I did work in social work for a while before doing community work. He said to me when he came to visit that he had visited people in prison. He's a very good guy, and he said trying to get to visit me was harder than visiting people in prison. There was no communication, so we weren't allowed mobile phones. There was a ward phone which is broken. And the only phone there was in the office. Anyway, so after a week or so, you were allowed to go out with someone walking around you. But you get the picture, it's incredibly oppressive. And you were treated totally pathologically. I was trying to, I realized quite quickly I had to stop talking about Kundalini, because every time I mentioned that, it was being pathologized. But I was saying that, look, I'm not depressed. This is making me very anxious. And then I was having panic attacks and stuff, but none of that was actually listened to at all. Eventually, after when they thought I was dosed up enough with antipsychotics to be no risk, because they thought I might have been a suicide risk, which I disagree, but I can understand why they thought that. But eventually, after 6 weeks, I was allowed out, and then I had nightly visits by the community mental team, and that was really oppressive as well, because they would sit over me to make sure I took the medication. And yeah, so it was a really bad experience.
Right. Well, I'm sorry you had to experience that, and I admire your courage. And years later, you've now got the Kundalini Collective going on to support others, so perhaps they don't have to experience what you did. There's some interesting themes that came up in what you just shared there. Firstly, of course, you recognize that the system is underfunded, and that there were some people in the field that were genuinely, open-hearted and willing to try their best to support you. And so I just want to highlight that, just because sometimes in the spiritual community, Western medicine and the system can be really demonized. but just for the sake of, recognizing that, there's systemic issues. And I personally do think that there's hope that there will be some shifts in paradigms, and they're coming, especially with work like what's going on with the Kundalini Collective, raising awareness and whatnot. So I just wanted to highlight that. There's a book by Jack Kornfield. It's called A Path with Heart. And in it, he describes a story of a meditation center. And there was a boy, maybe a teenager, I'm not sure. But anyway, he was meditating. He has a spiritual emergence similar to what you experienced. And he comes into the hall where they're eating, and he says, I can see everyone's past lives. And he starts doing karate. He's having a genuine spiritual experience, of course, ungrounded. But the point of that story is that the teacher recognizes, because they're familiar with what this looks like. Oh, okay, this person's having a spiritual experience. No meditation. They just made him run 10 miles a day, I think. He had to, do some work around the place, take hot showers, these types of things. They may be getting some of the details wrong. They made him eat well. They supported him through it, right? They didn't, like you experience, put him in a, what would be called a cell. And so we see the distinction between the way that people are treated, just with a little bit of awareness of what's happening here. So with the Kundalini Collective, of course, your intention is to offer, some solace and some support for those going through these types of experiences. What's the direction that you're seeing this going into the future? And do you have any intention to change the way that society treats these types of experiences in general? Do you see that being an impact? Like, maybe some of the more the medical field, academia coming on and recognizing, okay, there's a whole group here of people with their heads on their shoulders, from all walks of life that are talking about this. We've got to give it a little bit more attention. Do you see this having that type of impact? I do. Just curious if you do.
Sorry, Samir, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, so the first thing I'd say is that Alan's experience is what generally happens, and what we want the Kundalini Collective to do is to give that extra space and support to people, because when they go through a crisis, although we recommend people going through crisis go to the Spiritual Crisis Network, but when you have people who support you and who give you space to allow you to speak, who don't turn you down or tell you you're mad, I think that even if you have a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks of that during that initial period, I think they'll carry you over. So there are now quite a few groups who are offering spaces for people who are in crisis or people who just need to begin to integrate it. And so I think the Kundalini Collective is not for crisis per se. There are places for that. We recommend those places on the website, but we're there to hold space for you when you need it. Because when you start on the journey of integration, it's a non-linear process. There'll be times when you're not having a great time and times when you're having a great time. So we're there either which way. When you're not having a great time, you can come and you can write something or join a group, and I think we hold space for people. And if you have that space, even for an hour or 2 hours, I think that will help you a lot for the next couple of weeks, and then you can come back. So there is that. But I think over the last few years, both Alan and myself, maybe in different ways, have been thinking about the wider picture. And I think that there is a growing movement of people who are coming from different elements. You don't have to come from the spiritual awakening. When I say spiritual awakening, there's not just Kundalini. People are awakening in different ways. Whether you want to call it spiritual awakening or another form of awakening, they're having a realization that society is not exactly what it seems to be, and there are different forms that it takes. And people are coming to this from different perspectives, but they're coming towards the same idea, which is we need change. And the first thing I'd say is I don't think you can have a Kundalini or spiritual awakening without having some kind of social or political shift, because when you start doing work on yourself and you start to surrender to the process, you start making different decisions. And those decisions affect your family, your friends, and that is a social change and a social shift. So when people have it collectively, mass change can happen. And I think we're seeing it now. We're in the middle of some kind of awakening process. And you can call it spiritual, you can call it societal, but I think the two are the same. But to your point about academia and government, I think you can look at the work of there's the neuroscientists, there's psychologists in academic fields at the moment who have had spontaneous Kundalini or spiritual awakenings and are writing papers about it. And I think what the next stage that we want to do, and I think we've been talking to the guys at When Lightning Strikes about this, is how can we come together and begin to create social change? And one is to begin to link the academics and the policymakers, and it will not happen overnight. So you have to think about a structure 3 to 5 years. And so Kate at When Lightning Strikes and myself, we happen to be filmmakers, and one of the things that we both think about is that we also started communities, and we did it kind of subconsciously. And so what we're thinking about is how can we take what we know and what we learned from community work and begin to use media to affect change. And I think in some ways that seems potentially, I'm not going to say definitely, seems the next natural step. How it manifests, I don't know yet, but when you can bring media and conversations to people, and I include academics who have gone through it themselves and who believe in it, you can begin to create social change. So I think that there's going to be a 3 to 5 year movement, but we are on the fringe currently. But very quickly, I think we're going to move more towards the center, not the center. What does that mean practically? Well, it means if you can get academia to from neuroscience to psychology to physiology to physics to start talking about the nature of consciousness, to awakenings, what is going on, and if you can put that together in media or create content, and then if you can get mainstream media, and I'm not talking about ourselves, whether it's the New York Times, the Guardian, the Daily Mail, which I'm not a big fan of, but anyone to cover it, then that's when you start creating change, because that acceptance will move the meter in a bigger way. And an analogy, which may or may not seem strange, is the current conversation about UAPs. Because in America, as you might know, there's the Senate, and on the 26th, they're going to have a commission about what's going on with that. It was covered by the New York Times in 2017. 60 Minutes in America covered the UAP phenomenon. There was a fringe movement 20 years ago here, and now Chuck Schumacher is talking about it. Marco Rubio is talking about it like it's real. So what's just happened? Something has shifted. And you might have your own opinions. I think there's something similar going on in that world and something going on in our world. And I think they're two parallel processes that are going to converge. Something's going on. There are many changes happening in society simultaneously. We're on one side of that, and we need to move it to the center. So whether it's media, academia, community, and community in different ways, this is going to happen. So those of us who've gone through the process, like yourself and Alan and Kate and Gordon and other people that we know, we're all putting ourselves in places where in the next 3 to 5 years, we're going to bring things together, and we're going to be there when these shifts happen. And society requires people who've gone through these changes to start helping. How and when that manifests, I don't know. But I think it's inevitable. And I think that this conversation is part of that process, where what you're doing is actually part of that process. You're reaching hundreds or thousands of people. And that is a change. So yeah, there is a shift happening. And the thing is, when you're in it, it's hard to talk about. It's hard to say, oh, it's happening. But in 3 years' time, we'll look back at this time, 2023, or post-pandemic, and we'll see how things have been moved so quickly. And I think a pandemic was the first ontological shock. There are going to be others coming, and society is going to want to need help. And I think what we're doing in the spiritual awakening space is we're going through our shadow to be there, ready when things begin to shift. What that means, I'm not saying I understand or I know. I always like to think political, social, not necessarily spiritual, but something's happening and we're part of it. I'm not sure whether that answers your question, but
it really does. Yeah, it's very inspiring as well. Thank you. Very well said.
No, I agree with that. But just to go back to the initial question from Brent, I just want to just say a couple of words about like the support for people going through Kundalini awakening. It relates to what Samir's been saying. I think there's two different aspects when it comes to support for people going through Kundalini awakening. I think all that you're doing, Brent, and others, in making, in just generally making more people aware of Kundalini awakening, more people aware of a greater reality. And there are people, say within the Spiritual Crisis Network, for instance, I know that just around sometime in July, it might have happened already, or maybe happening very soon, a couple of people are doing a presentation to the National School of, not psychiatrists, unfortunately, but psychologists. Psychologists being a bit easier to approach than psychiatrists. So I think what I'm trying to say, I think it needs to be tackled in two aspects. One, chipping away, increasing awareness. And with psychiatrists, that's difficult because still the training within psychiatry is very, very reductionist and materialistic. But keep banging away there. Bang away with people in the mental health systems such as psychologists, also community support. In Britain, there's things like the Mind organisation who provide lots of support in the community. Those organisations, again, are a bit more open than psychiatrists. So on one level, keep on trying to do that work with the services. But the other level is then developing our own alternative support, which is about community, about forming community for people going through these experiences. I didn't want to add that to it.
I just want to add, there's a lady called Katie Mottram who very much helped Alan during his process, and she's become a friend of mine. Alan introduced her to me and become friends. In the UK, she started a group called Emerging Proud. And it wasn't necessarily about Kundalini awakenings, it was about general spiritual awakenings, but the movement was to create change in the mental health services. And she made a lot of inroads. She's taken a pause and she's doing a master's now. But internationally and in the UK, she brought together people in the National Health Service, psychologists, even psychiatrists, just to inform them that spiritual awakening is a real phenomenon. So there are these people with different, her group's called Emerging Proud, but there are these groups that are being created all over the world. And in fact, when she had a spiritual awakening, what she's told us is that she was given that kind of mission. She was told, you need to make change within the mental health profession, because she was working in the mental health profession herself. So there are movements all around the world, ones that we do and don't know, that are looking to merge the spiritual and create change within traditional mental health professions. And I think that change is happening. I think people are listening. Maybe, well, Alan, I think people are listening. I would also say that this weekend we went to a festival called Community, which is run by Russell Brand. And what was interesting was you had these normal people from all parts of the UK and the world, and they're all leaving their traditional lives and trying to do something different and create communities. And they're merging spiritual ideas with activism. And they're all on some kind of awakening process. I'm not talking about spiritual awakening in a traditional way, but they are, you have men who are looking at their own masculinity and looking at being vulnerable and talking about their emotions and people coming together. And so, Russell Brand's doing his own thing, and it's not what we're doing, but I don't think it's too dissimilar. I think they're groups forming, and they're trying to make social change in different ways. And it's all part of a wider awakening process. And it may seem fringe now, but actually it's going to be mainstream in 3 to 5 years. One thing we saw, this guy called Satish Kumar, a very interesting old activist, and he talked about activism with no objective. If you're going to be an activist, but don't be an activist to be attached to the outcome. Be it because you embody that activism. And I think that is what a spiritual awakening is. When you work through your shadow, it brings you to a place where you embody a position and work, and you let go of the outcome, and you just need to do the work. And so you know, Satish wasn't coming from the spiritual awakening, and he may have had one himself, but he was just talking to everyone in the community festival, normal people, and they understood, you know, if you're going to be an activist, you're going to make social change, work on yourself and try not to have an attachment to the outcome. And I think ultimately that's what we're all doing from different ways, whether it's Kundalini, spiritual, societal awakening. We're all trying to make social change and come to that point where the inside and the outside are connected. We change ourselves, we change the outside, and vice versa.
Right. Oh, incredible. Yes, this gives a lot of hope for the future, but at the same time, a lot of responsibility as well for us all. I like what Alan said, especially about creating alternative means of support. So rather than solely relying on, you know, the institution to acknowledge this, which of course I think will come, like Samir, you're saying, I think we're making a lot of headway on those fronts, but why can't we create our own alternative means of support, like what you've done with the Kundalini Collective? I think out of all the people that I've talked to, I think the number one way of supporting one another is not by energy healing or giving advice even. It's just by listening. It's just by relating. Like you guys started, you know, over pizza, just having a conversation and knowing that there are others out there going through this. That makes it so much easier for us to trust in the organic unfolding of this, the wisdom of our body, just knowing that other people are going through it. It's incredible to see how all of this is coming together so quickly. But I really love your point there, Samir, of putting a bit of a timeline on it, 3 to 5 years. It's grounded then. We have a bit of a roadmap, not necessarily how to go there, but a bit of a timeline for how long it'll take to give us a little bit of, you know, sometimes you might, it feels like we're just in the midst of like, you know, it's just happening. We don't really know where it's going. But if we look at it in the way you described, we zoom out a bit. Okay, yeah, I can see in 3-4 years, some significant shifts will happen for sure. I could see that. And it's inspiring. I feel more encouraged to keep going with this work. So thank you. Thank you both for that. So as we come to wrap up here, I want to invite everybody to check out the Kundalini Collective. Can you mention again briefly what your offerings are? I know that you've got Zoom meetings, in-person meetings. Can you give some links out? Of course, everything will be in the description.
So the website is kundalini.org.uk. There's a Kundalini Yoga Collective. Sorry, kundalinicollective.org.uk. The org is important, otherwise there's a yoga website. We're offering the website itself as a resource. So we encourage members to post on the website, to put, for those that feel able to put their stories, to put recommendations, their own recommendations for books, videos, and so forth. We have a section on creativity, because I think for Samir and myself and for others, creativity is part of the process. We have the face-to-face meetups every few months in London, and we have the podcasts, and also over the last few months we've been developing a support page. So as Samir has already mentioned, if someone's in a crisis, to go to the Spiritual Crisis Network, and there's a link to the Spiritual Crisis Network, because we're not really a crisis organisation, we're a group, we're a support group. But we also have a list of people, a number of who are members of the collective, who've all been through Kundalini, who are all going through the process, Kundalini process, who can offer an array of one-to-one support. So for one person, that's literally just a session where someone can just talk to this person for a session, and then there's an array of support, including those which goes into like psychotherapy and so forth. And then there are references to people such as you mentioned, Craig Holliday, and we're aiming to grow that list, because I think having that informed one-to-one support is really important. And we believe in peer support, but we also believe in giving people options for whatever support they find most appropriate for themselves. So there's that on the site as well. Samir, what have I missed out?
Yeah, it should also mention that the support, some of which is free. So some people are offering free support. Some people are, because it's their business, they're charging for it. And some people are qualified psychotherapists who've also had Kundalini awakening. So it's a range of different support. But the one thing we should also mention, which is why it's free, is that when a lot of people can't work when they're going through a Kundalini experience, and we're trying to offer as much as possible as for free, so that people don't have to worry about paying, because we understand that that's a problem when you're going through the awakening process. So with the support, you can pay for it, or some people are offering it free. But the idea is like the NHS in the UK is going to be free at the point of access. We're trying to make the Kundalini Collective as much as possible free at the point of access. People can access it, and we run by donation only. So we hope we're covering as many bases as we can. But as Alan said, that the more content that's put on the website, the more resources there'll be for future. So we encourage people to write or add content as much as they can. And Brent, I want to invite you to write a blog, because we need more blogs. I know you posted on there, but please, and if you want to blog more. But please add content as much as you want.
Oh, great! I appreciate the invite. Yeah, I'd be happy to see what I'm inspired to write about. Yeah, I was reading some of the blogs on the Kundalini Collective website. I was shared a blog by Joe DeRiso about his awakening, and that's how I connected with him for a conversation. It'll be on, it's on my channel if you look in the history there, and that was a great conversation as well. There's a lot of really evolved people that are part of the movement, sharing and connecting on the forums. Of course, you've also got your YouTube channel with your podcast interviews, similar to the format that I've got here, and there's a lot of wisdom in those as well. And I'll link your channel in the description for others to check out as well. And of course, Alan's story is on the channel for those that are interested in going a little deeper.
Could I add one thing?
Yeah, please.
Joe wants to start an American meetup group, and America's obviously a big place. So on the website is posted just an idea for the Americans if they want to create a meetup group, whether it's a state or whether it's, I don't know, with a country. So I encourage your listeners and yourself just to respond to Joe's post, because in the UK is a small island, obviously, so it's maybe easier for us to meet up, but there is this benefit of meeting people in person. So if you guys can get together and meet up somewhere, I think you really benefit from it.
Great. Yeah. So please, if there are people out there that are feeling the call to, continue this trajectory towards bringing awareness of Kundalini, supporting one another in the States, yeah, check out Joe's post on the Kundalini Collective. As well, can you give us a little bit more information about your in-person meetups? Where are they generally held? What can people expect? How can people connect with you if they're interested?
Yep.
Sure. They're now the last Friday of each month at 7 o'clock UK.
No, hang on, Alan.
Oh, sorry.
This is the in-person meetups.
Also the in-person. Sorry, I thought about the Zoom.
Yep.
Sorry.
No problem. So the Zoom meetings are once a month. You said the last Friday?
Last Friday of the month at 7 o'clock UK time.
Okay, and it's free to join. You accept donations?
Yep.
Okay,
yep.
Great. So hopefully people can join on Zoom and share. But then, of course, you do also offer the in-person meetings as well. Can you give us some details about that?
They're on a more ad hoc basis every few months. What we do is we post it in the forum in the Kundalini Collective sort of projects, activity. And also we do a monthly newsletter towards the end of each month, and we publicize the face-to-face meetups in that as well.
We should add the next meetups on August 5th, Saturday, August the 5th at 2 p.m. UK time. We meet in Hyde Park, near a station called Lancaster Gate. And so the next one is August the 5th, 2 p.m. Hyde Park near Lancaster Gate Station. And it's on the website in the event section. And it's probably every 3 months. I mean, it's not exactly every 3 months. We try to have 3 or 4 times a year a meetup.
Great. Yes, I was in touch with somebody that was attending the meetings, and she got back to me and said it was a great experience, and of course I'm on the other side of the ocean, but maybe one day I'll find myself in the UK and things will line up and we can meet in person. But meeting over Zoom today has been great. It really has been. I appreciate both of you for sharing your stories. Well, the short segments of your stories that you shared. Of course, I just want to recognize that you both have years and years of experience, and I'm sure we glossed over some things and some key themes were left out. But for those who are interested in following along with the Kundalini Collective, I'm sure more and more of your stories and wisdom and insight will be teased out over time. So with that said, I invite everybody to check out everything in the description. Alan, Samir, thank you so much for the work that you're doing with the Kundalini Collective, for your courage, for your willingness to support one another. And I really, really appreciate having, fellow travelers on this journey with me. Sometimes I can still feel a little crazy. So connecting with the two of you, I feel grounded and validated, and I'm sure others will as well. So to all those listening out there, thank you so much for spending time with Alan and Samir and I. Check out the Kundalini Collective. And until next time, much love and peace.